Hi everyone, Mr. Barden here. This video is going to be the last video in the Unit 1 setup for this kind of teacher's edition of the programming digital media content. So if you're not a teacher of this course or a similar one, I definitely recommend looking at some of the other videos both on my channel and just on YouTube as a whole. I'm going to be gearing this generally towards teachers as if they are my intended audience. So, general kinds of tips and guidelines and comments, with that mindset in line. Um, One thing to note is that if you're watching all of these kind of as they come out, there's going to be a little pause before I hop into Unit 2, just kind of getting ready for things. And as we go along, um, one thing to note is in the future, I may remake some of these earlier videos as I kind of get more feedback and practice talking to the teachers. So that's one thing to note is you may notice that at the very least these beginning ones may get remade as we go along. The other thing is that so far in the description, I've put links to various codes that I've been making in the videos, but this one won't actually have that. So this page of the textbook that we're looking at right here, actually I built from the ground up to kind of act as a tutorial. So if you were to kind of scroll through here, um, there's all that. So rather than looking through a bunch of code, and going back and forth. I actually made all of this pretty much in this video right here, which is for the students. So if you wanted to check that out, it's all right
Hey
here, and you can
everyone.
see me building all of that. I'm not gonna go through it all, but you can see it all right there. I'm kind of discussing a lot of what I'm going to talk about here. Uh, so the main things we're going to go through are, making an object in JavaScript, what and why, and some of the notation we use with that, and then we're going to tie it back a little bit into some of the ideas we talked about with the functions in the last video. So with that being said, let's just kind of hop into it. If you enjoy the content, learn something new, definitely like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. If there's anything that you want to a little further clarification on, definitely put that down in the comment with any other questions. And if there's any topics that you would like to see me cover in future videos, also put those down in the comments. And as I make them, I'll add those into the viewer suggested playlist on the main channel. So let's look at this code right here. Shouldn't be anything really new. It's drawing a circle on the background. Um, nothing nuts. I'm using variables to draw this, and that's just to kind of go where we need to go. We can customize some of this without having to add unnecessary steps. So again, we're making an ellipse. It's a perfect circle at this location with this diameter. That's great. However, there's a few things that you may not have picked up on or been aware. I know a lot of my students tend to kind of overlook this fact, and that is that as far as the computer is concerned, this is not an entity. This is, we're using these values, we're saving these numbers, and we just so happen to be calling them here. The computer does not equate in its brain that we have this circle with these values. And as we change them, we see it there that they aren't connected. They're two different things. Um, so in order to kind of go around that, we're going to be ultimately building a thing in JavaScript, and just for lack of a better term, because it's very vague still at this stage in our scrolling. But we're making a something that has values attached to that something rather than just these two things, and we happen to be using one to control the other. But as far as the computer is concerned, they aren't connected. We're going to be connecting a value to something and using that in different ways. That's essentially what an object is. However, to get into that, there is a specific bit of notation, which I have right here. So this is an object. What an object is an entity in our code that has properties. It has values connected to that object. So to do that, we let circle just like a variable. And in fact, this will start off just a lot like making an array. We're going to assign it to be an object like so. And basically, instead of typing in these square brackets like we would to make an array, like let um, like so with the square brackets, this is going to be with the curly brackets or curly braces that we see with functions and conditionals and for loops and things like that. So again, we will have the curly braces instead. Um, and then inside of that, we're going to specify, much like a variable, the property and the value. And I've diluted this to be as simple as possible for the students. And it's basically just inside of your object, you create a parameter, you name it whatever you want, parameter colon value, parameter colon value, and so on. And you just list them out in between these brackets, just parameter colon value. And you separate them with a comma, parameter colon value, parameter colon value for whatever you want. That's the general underlying purpose. Anytime you would see this JSON is, it's whatever the parameter is colon whatever the value of that parameter, for whatever we need. And these can be whatever you want. There's no set list of x y diameter. There's no set thing. So don't, if your student thinks, okay, well, what is the that, or does every object have a parameter? No, they don't. It's whatever you tell it to be, and then we're going to use these values in the next step. Um, so again, I've diluted this to be as simple as possible. So let object equal, and then parameter one name colon value colon parameter two name that one's value, and so on. To use it, we just need to use the dot notation. So it's going to be the name dot the property. And we've already used this a bit with some arrays. All right, so the array, array dot push. We're telling the array to do a thing. Array dot length is a property like this. Things like that, and that kind of mindset. So object name dot parameter name. That's how we're going to use these things. So we've got this right here. We're drawing an ellipse using circle.x, circle.y, circle.diameter. And again, these are all, here they happen to be color coded. Dot diameter. Here's the diameter of the circle. So that's how we're filling all of that in. Um, okay. There's some extra stuff in the comments here. Um, but we're going to be affecting all of this. It's important to know that, again, we have to talk to the outer object before we talk to the parameter. We can't just adjust x, and that's what I've got here. So like if I were to uncomment this and rerun it, we would run into a bit of a problem. Versus here, if we wanted to move this circle, we could, uncomment that, and we should see it start to move when it reloads. There we go. Because, again, we're talking to the circle.x. And since we're using circle.x to now draw our circle, that's why we see it update. We've, again, built the object, the collection of these data points that we're using for one, cohesive element. We haven't really attached them to the thing yet. We've taken all these 3 random values from the very first sketch right here, and we have now grouped all 3 of these values into a larger object. But we won't really get an entity that we can use and have everything constructed until we get into the building a class of objects. Okay, so that's what we have going on here. Yeah, so we can see this kind of update. We can play that around there. If you were to have several JSON objects, it's very useful for organizing a lot of variables. So again, if we were to make 2 circles, we'd have something like this with circle 1x, circle 2a, and so on. It's a lot, but we can kind of organize it right here. So we've got this first object, and that's all of this object's content, and object number 2, and here's all of this object's, all of the things here and here, and you could even put in the color instead. So I've got, the filling right here, but we could say, color Actually, I want to make that. Let's say hue. No, actually, I need the comma. So now we'll go color colon purple like so, and I can fill this instead of purple. This would be circle one dot color. I forgot to put that there. There we go. So now we get it's the exact same thing, but now all of this is related to this object. We can see that we're getting this color. It's part of the circle one object. We're using it for all of these things. It's very useful for organizing a lot of your variables. So you may not have 30 variables that are just kind of thrown there on your list. As a teacher, it makes things a lot easier to see and grade and see where things belong. As for how many students do that, that's most of mine tend not to unless I make them do it. So that's kind of up to whether or not you prefer to do that. But it's wonderful for organizing everything. And when you don't have a ton of comments, it's a little easier, not super space consuming. But now you have your two objects and you can alter them independently. That's great. But you notice these are pretty much the same thing. A lot of repetition here. What if you could make a template for making multiple objects? And this is where the idea of a class comes into play. So if you have an object and you want to make it, but you want to make multiple versions of this object, we can instead make a class. This is going back a little bit to the idea of a function, where you have something that you want to do, with your code multiple times. Well, this is now, instead of doing something, we're gonna make something. That's a very minor and distinct distinction, and you may not even bring it up to your students like that. That may be a little confusing. But again, we are going to make a template to make a lot of things. You make multiple versions of that. So I've got this code right here, and it's basically like we have before, except I've commented out some of the old stuff. So there's a lot of comments in here. So I'm going to kind of break this down. So we've made circle one, circle two like before. Pretty straightforward. Only now we have some new stuff popping up. This being circle one gets assigned to be a new circle. What does that mean? Well, this is where the class comes into play. It's a new instance of the circle class. So let's hop down a bit. Just like making a function, you want to go, for me at least, if you're not having this as a separate file, go way down to the bottom of your sketch and, we're going to say class, circle. And then that gets its brackets, no parentheses, just brackets. One thing is, a class tends to have a capital letter for its name to indicate that it is a class. So I'll usually bring that up to my students, but I don't harp on it too much because it's generally more of a guideline than a rule. It's not going to affect how it functions, but if they want to go off into coding, make sure that they kind of follow that guideline. But inside of that, we've got a few things. And basically, we're going to be making what's called a method. There are several methods for building this class. One of which is the constructor. That's kind of the first one I always start with. And this is what's going to make up the object. So this dot x, this dot y, this dot diameter, this dot move, stuff like that. These should all be pretty similar. And also not. So this is the first time we've seen the appearance of this, THIS. Again, we are making a template for the object. The object does not exist yet. We can't say circle 1.x. That doesn't work. So this serves as a placeholder for whatever object we're talking about. So we're going to make circle 1. So when we start building it, everywhere we see this, this is going to be replaced with circle 1, circle 2. circle 700, whatever it's going to be. Again, the template is what we're making, and then we'll call that template however many times we need it. So that's why we have this instead. It's just kind of a placeholder. So this dot x. Basically the constructor method is where you construct, you get all the values in that you're going to use. You're creating all of these properties of the object. So the property of x, y, diameter, move direction. We're making all of those in the constructor. That's an important one to have. Once you've made that, then we can do stuff with all the things in the constructor, and we can just refer to it by the name, this.x, this.y, and so forth. So the kind of default one that we have is, some way to, if something's going to pop up on the screen, you need to have a method that tells it to do it. So again, we have appear, and we type all these methods out. It's essentially a little function, and this is some shorthand for appear, and then it gets its parentheses, and then the brackets. That's kind of, I think, the most concise way to show what's going on here, and it still be pretty straightforward. So the brackets, and we're going to say, okay, all of these is going to be a purple. Every circle we make is going to be purple, and it's going to be an ellipse using these things right here. These values, pretty straightforward, I think. But you need to have some way to make something pop up on the screen, and then it's using these values instead as a template. And then later on we'll do something with it. In this case, we're gonna move it, and we're gonna set up how it bonks around. So now, once we've got that template, everything worked out, we can go back up here. So we've made circle 1, cool. This circle 1 is now a new circle, a new object of the circle class. So that's what that line has right there. We don't have any special arguments yet. We'll get to that. That's in the next step. But later on, in order to see it, we need to call these functions. If I get rid of circle1.appear, it's no longer appearing. The object is still there and it's still doing its thing, but we just can't see it. So we have to tell it to appear. And then we're also telling it to move. We don't have to, though. Again, the class of object, this is everything that our object could do. It is the template for building the object. If you don't want it to move, you don't tell it to move. If you do, tell it to move, but you got to make sure that your object has the template for how to move as a method. All right, so again, we're adding, these methods are, things the object can appear on the screen. We want to tell it how to do that. The object in this case can move. We want to tell it how it can move. Stuff like that. And it all kind of boils down to the specific context for what you and your student want to do. So I'm not going to dive too much into that in specifics, but again, everything in the class is a template. If it's not in the class, the object cannot do it. A few of my students didn't quite pick up on that. So the next chunk of this book is kind of the text version of everything I've mentioned over the past few minutes. So, talking about the this dot and appearing all of there, using things like so. This is, again, pretty much the same stuff, but breaking it all down. We've got a method. There's different ways you can break this down, but a method is just a little function for how stuff that your code can do. There's a shorthand where you can dot appear, and we specify it appear, and then just the brackets. It's pretty straightforward. I think it's relatively clear. You can see them right here. Most of my students don't have issues with that, so I kind of just gloss over it. The last bit of this, generally speaking, is an argument. So you can have your objects, but you can have them all in a same class, but have them be unique. So let me scroll down just a bit so we can see the whole sketch. There we go. So I've set this up. There's a lot of this is just kind of duplicate the code and move on. But I've got this right here. So I've made the class here for circle. It's diameter. I called this one shade instead of before, but we got it's behaving like we had before. All of our circles have an X, a Y, a diameter, a color, and uh, a direction that they're moving. All right. So basically, instead of hard coding it to a number like we had before, we are, like with our functions, giving it an arguments in the constructor method. Notice when we make the class, there's no parentheses here because this is not a function that we are making. And in fact, adding those parentheses just broke everything. So for a class, no parentheses. Uh, every one of these methods, if they need an argument, you type the argument right here and then you fill in how it goes, just like making a function. For a class with our constructor, to make them all look different, that's where we would put them right there. So whenever we make the object, now we have to give it these arguments to construct the object. So boom, constructor right there. Get it up. And we fill in x to x. To trace it back, this dot x is x. X is the first value there. So for circle 1, dot x would be the 100 right here. And again, we kind of follow that through for each one. I don't think we're drawing them. We're not, so we're not actually seeing them at all, but they are being made. And we've got a few things happening here. So because these arguments can all be unique and can change how each one appears, maybe I wanted to, in my draw function, circle 2 dot appear. There's that green circle, and it's just chilling there. But it's still a part of the circle class. It can do all the things the other circles can. It's a unique thing. It's uniquely green. It's just sitting there, but it could bounce around. It depends on what you want it to do. So I'll get rid of that. Again, nothing saves when I make changes here. So what I've done to create this is I've made a for loop. And basically, I've gone in, basically made an array to hold all of my circles, so that way we can pull some of this off later. But in this for loop, basically every instance of the array, and I'm making 30 of them, but it's going to be a new circle in this class. So a new instance of this template, a new object. And it's going to be I times 100, or times 10, I'm sorry, time for the X, I times 15 for the Y, I times 2 for the scale. So, 0 times 2 is 0. That's the scale. That's why we don't see 1 at the very top. I times 1 is 1. That's the scale, and so forth. So we can build up this scale to make them as big or as small as we need. And actually, I'm using that to affect the diameter rather than scaling it if we're getting technical. There, and then the last one is the color. So if I wanted to, I can make all of these a random color. So, I don't have that function on here, so I'm going to leave them as red, but, we can make it be a random, just to do it really quickly. Colors equal array red blue yellow pink green. Why not? I'll leave it at these colors just for the sake of that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm just going to tweak this just a bit. So now I'll change that to 5, and this is now we got those there, and instead of red we could be like colors I, and now we start getting these different colors. We don't see the very first one because it's 0 diameters wide or 0 pixels in diameter, so we just don't see it. But now we can start getting these different colors. I'll put this back to how it was. 30 and red. Just for the sake of that, we've got that right there. We're just making all of them, the same color, but they're all slightly different positions, all slightly different sizes, and that's how we get that appearance. And now I've added this right here, and this is what pulls off a lot of this to make it a little more easy. So I put all of them in an array, so that way I could use an array method called for each. And basically, the way this works is for inside of the circles, every circle we're going to do this. And this is another way of making a function that doesn't have a name. This function has no name. But basically, it's for every object in here, we're going to make the circle show up, and we're going to make it move. And again, this gets filled in with whatever the object name is. So, circle 17, we're going to fill that name in, and we're going to make sure it appears, and we're going to make sure it moves. And the movement is telling it to do all the moving back and forth just like before, but because they all had a unique starting position and size, it forms this kind of repeating pattern. It all comes down to this right here, as opposed to manually moving each of them independently, because we don't know all their names because we made a whole bunch of them. The reason I set it up this way is because of a lot of what we do in the Bug Squish project later on in the graphics unit. It's a very similar kind of approach. So I just want to I structured it like this to kind of call back to what was happening right there. That's pretty much it. Again, I kind of just went through a lot of what was on this page and exploring the codes. But it's generally set up so that if you go through from top to bottom, it builds on itself until you get to the final essence of it. And generally, at least in my experience and my students' experiences, you'll make a class and make a bunch of objects. It's not super common outside of a way to organize a bunch of, not there, up here, a way to organize a bunch of variables that they make just a JSON object, and that's it. It's generally a class of the objects. But again, I've got a video where I'm actually building a lot of these codes that you saw in the page. This is kind of the one I give my students most of the time, but you can check it out here. I went ahead and just kind of, did it pretty much like these videos a few years back now. This would have been 2020, 2021, give or take. There's a few more examples. So here are some of the ghosts from the function lesson, but we're setting setting them up differently. So now I get random ones. Some, this one follows the mouse. This one, another one kind of moves around on the screen, things like that. And then some other interactions you could work on if you wanted to. In another little video lesson. So that's pretty much it. I think it's relatively straightforward, at least once you get in and do it. So again, there's not going to be a unique P5 code attached to this video, because all the codes I would have built are already right here, and we would have kind of built through and elaborated on each of them. So definitely, this would have been 2020. So definitely check out some of those other videos. If you have any questions or concerns about any of the material that I've gone through in this video or any of the previous ones, definitely put those in the comments below, and I'll respond to those as they pop up. Again, this is the last video in Unit 1, the kind of intro to coding. So by going through all of this, you hopefully have an idea of what your students need to do for everything moving forward. By this point, they'll have seen everything they need to know, and all the stuff with The graphics and the audio in really all the other units are just variations and applications of everything in this kind of front matter unit. Um, so that's gonna wrap it up for now. I'm gonna, rather than ramble a little bit like I tend to do in some of these more freeform videos with no real script, I'm just gonna end it here. So like, comment, subscribe, all the boring YouTube stuff. And I'm gonna see you all the next time that I see you. Bye.